Welcome to this presentation on verb tenses. Tense shows the time of a verb's action. Remember that verbs are words that describe an action, state of being, or occurrence. Basically, verbs can take place in the past, present, and future. Please note that the verbs in the following slides are in the active voice. For more information on the active versus the passive voice, please take a look at the Writing and Learning Services Prezi. The past, present, and future verbs can be organized into 4 tense categories: simple, progressive, perfect, and perfect progressive. Let's begin with present tense, which explains an action that is occurring now, occurs habitually, or is generally true. An example of simple present tense of a regular verb, walk, is Harry walks to the store. After the verb, add s or es for third person. Progressive tense indicates continuing, therefore progressive action. Progressive tense consists of a form of be plus the verb's ing form, the present participle. An example of present progressive tense is Harry is walking through the streets. A formula to remember this is am or is or are plus the present participle. Perfect tense generally indicates action completed before another specific time or action. The term perfect actually comes from the Latin term completed. Present perfect tense is often used to suggest that a past action still has an effect on something happening in the present. An example of present perfect tense is Harry has walked this route before. Here's the formula: has or have plus the past participle. Use perfect progressive tense to show that something started in the past and has continued into the present. Present perfect progressive tense is used to stress the ongoing nature of the action. For example, Harry has been walking for days. The formula is has or have been plus the present participle. The past tense describes action that occurred before now. An example of the simple past tense is Harry walked to the corner store. The formula is the verb plus d or ed or t for regular verbs. The past progressive tense is used to describe action ongoing in the past. Harry was walking along the beach to find seashells. Remember it like this: was or were plus the present participle. Past perfect tense refers to action that was completed before another action. For example, Harry had walked until well after midnight before he saw the moon. The formula is had plus the past participle. Past perfect progressive tense is used to indicate that a continuing action began before another past action began, or the continuing action interrupted the first action. For example, Harry had been walking a long time before his employer called him. A formula to remember this is had been plus the present participle. The future tense describes action that will occur in the future. Simple future tense refers to action that will take place after the act of speaking or writing about the action. Examples of simple future tense are Harry will walk to the beach or Harry is going to walk to the beach. You can use these formulas: will plus the verb, or am or is or are going to plus the verb. Future progressive tense describes action ongoing in the future. You can say, Harry will be walking to buy a treat, or Harry is going to be walking to buy a treat. Remember these formulas: will be plus the present participle, or am or is or are going to be plus the present participle. Future perfect tense describes an action that will be completed before another future action. For example, Harry will have walked 6 blocks before he takes a break, or Harry is going to have walked 6 blocks before he takes a break. You can remember the future perfect like this: will have plus the past participle, or am or is or are going to have plus the past participle. Future perfect progressive tense indicates a continuing action that will be completed at a specified time in the future. For example, Harry will have been walking for 3 hours by lunchtime, or Harry is going to have been walking for 3 hours by lunchtime. Use these formulas: will have been plus the present participle, or am or is or are going to have been plus the present participle. Now that you have the basics of verb tenses, let's talk about mixing verb tenses. In order to determine the correct verb sequence, you have to identify the independent and dependent clauses in a sentence. For more information on these topics, please look at the Prezzies on sentence structure. The sequence of tenses in complex sentences is usually determined by the tense of the verb in the independent clause. In general, present tenses may be followed by a wide variety of tenses as long as the sequence fits the logic of the sentence. However, when the verb in the independent clause is in the past tense, the verb in the dependent clause is usually in the past tense as well. For example, Kyle waited impatiently while his brother cooked dinner. The verb in the independent clause, Kyle waited impatiently, is in the past tense. Thus, the verb in the dependent clause, while his brother cooked dinner, is also in the past tense. Unnecessary or inconsistent shifts in tense can cause confusion. Generally, writers maintain a primary tense for a piece of writing and indicate changes in time frame by changing tense relative to that primary tense. Here are some general guidelines for employing verb tenses consistently and clearly. Do not shift from one tense to another if the time frame for each action or state is the same. It's really important to look at the context of your sentence before you decide on your tense choice. For example, the museum guide explains the murals to people who asked questions during the tour. Explains is in the present tense, referring to a current state. Asked is in the past tense, but it should be in the present tense, because people are currently continuing to ask questions during the tour. Here is a revised version. The museum guide explains the murals to people who ask questions during the tour. If necessary, shift tends to indicate a change in time frame from one action or state to another. For example, the painter loves her easel, which she built herself. Loves is in the present tense, referring to a current state. She loves the easel now. Built is in the past tense, referring to an action completed before the current time frame. She's not still building her easel. If you are writing a paragraph, you can establish a primary tense and use occasional shifts to other tenses to indicate changes in time frame. For example, there are high percentages of inmates in Canadian prisons who suffer from FAS or FAE, and they persistently reoffend. As a result, great portions of their lives are spent in prison. Johnson, 2002, para 5. Smith's 2003 study showed that prison has not helped reform the majority of these inmates, pages 47 to 75. Because of the characteristics of FAS and FAE disorders, such as an inability to understand the consequences of behavior, more research needs to be done to study whether a prison setting is appropriate for these inmates, or whether their needs would be best served by the mental health care profession. The primary tense of this paragraph is in the present, because the writer wants to make it clear that it is a current issue. However, when the writer introduces Smith's research, the writer shifts to the past tense to indicate that the research was completed in 2003. This brings us to another important point, which is how to introduce your sources with the appropriate verb tense. Documentation style guides, such as MLA and APA, require specific verb tenses to introduce findings from researchers. In the previous paragraph example, the writer used the past tense to incorporate Smith's ideas, as in, Smith's study showed. According to the American Psychological Association, APA, use the past tense to express an action or a condition that occurred at a specific, definite time in the past, as when discussing another researcher's work and when reporting your own results. Unlike the APA style, the present tense of verbs is most commonly used in the Modern Language Association, MLA style. For example, Edgar V. Roberts offers this interesting comment about the origins of fiction. Fiction had its roots in ancient myths and folk tales. In primitive civilizations, stories were circulated by word of mouth, and often traveling storytellers would appear in a court or village to entertain eager listeners, with tales based on the exploits of heroes and gods. Although many of these were heavily fictionalized accounts of events and people, they were largely accepted by the people as fact or history. 51. In this example, a present tense verb, offers, introduces the paraphrase. However, since Edgar V. Roberts' ideas are based on past events, it is appropriate to establish the primary tense by using past tense verbs, such as had and were. However, in certain contexts, such as literature, you may assume that everything happening in a short story, novel, play, or poem takes place in the present, so it would be appropriate to use the present tense of verbs. For example, the ghost of Hamlet's father claims that Claudius murdered Hamlet's father. In this example, the action claims is in the present tense. However, please note that murdered is in the past tense because Hamlet's father is dead when the play begins. Thanks for viewing this presentation on verb tenses. For more information on MLA and APA, check out the Prezi on documentation styles.